Hey, I'm Tim Barnes, and this is the best of You Are the Genre.
First I got your voicemail, then I got you. We can meet in person or maybe on Zoom. So tell me what's your genre, tell me what do you do? I'd like to know the things that specifically make you.
I hope you enjoyed that You Are the Genre theme song from Freddie Nunez. That's right, we're continuing our brief hiatus of the You Are the Genre podcast with a highlight episode focusing on horror. You know, scary stuff, things that go bump or thump in the night. And while scary things have popped up in some of the other highlight episodes, like my conversation with Mike Sachs about his love of the Twilight Zone and how that merges with comedy, or my conversation with Branson Reese, who grew up loving Halloween. By the way, if you love scary stuff and you live in New York, you should consider going to Caveat on October 15th for a variety show / horror movie screening of The Wolfman from Hoff Matthews. It's called Hoff's Horror Fest Presents The Wolfman, and I'll likely appear there in some digital form. Not only that, but you can look forward to Hoff Matthews joining me on You Are the Genre next week when we return to full episodes. Anyway, to dive back into the scary stuff of it all, here's a portion of my conversation with Eliza Cossio. She was my first guest on You Are the Genre. She's also written for shows like Our Flag Means Death and This Fool and The Daily Show. Here's how scary things, mystical things, and the unknown have influenced her.
So my dad's side is Mexican. My mom's side is also Mexican. But my dad's side had a particularly deep connection to its indigenous roots, and not necessarily my dad, but my grandparents had that connection. And like my grandfather would say that, again, it all gets wrapped up in his tall tales, but that like we were Aztec, and that's like where how we're able to speak to some of these spirits. Like everybody on my dad's side has a connection to other realms, like they can talk to ghosts and stuff. They know ghosts, and I don't have that. It skipped me, and I think because well, it's interesting you say that, because my uncle recently was like, I think you just have to open yourself up to it. It's very like, you know, premise of a Disney movie, but I say that because of Encanto, I think. But anyway, there was a lot more folklore that goes against Catholicism. And on my mom's side, you know, famously, my mom was a nun before she married my dad. That's how Catholic.
Did we talk about this before? I don't know.
I feel silly saying that I like science fiction because it feels a little removed for me, but it also was so like deeply shaping. And I feel like we've talked about the Twilight Zone. And when my dad would show me the Twilight Zone as a kid, I was like, this is the best show I've ever seen. This is like so cool and so weird. And, you know, we'd watch Star Trek so much and Star Wars, and I wasn't necessarily drawn into it in that way, but it was just very shaping. Except for Twilight Zone. Twilight Zone was very like one of those things that I watched and I knew I would love forever.
It's making me think of something in my own life that I haven't really articulated before, but at least for like my family, it feels like there's a lot of magical thinking when it comes to faith, but then also a lot of focus on the reality of things at the same time. I wonder if you had something like that in your life as well, where there's a lot of like keeping it real, but then also a glimmer of hope tied to Jesus, like where anything is possible.
Yeah. You know, I don't think we've talked about this, but I'm a Mets fan, New York City Metropolitans. And I don't know why, because it's not necessarily like being a baseball fan is not in my personality. It's just not something that lines up with who I am to be somebody who loves going to a baseball game. But I'm drawn to the Mets, and, you know, part of it was living in New York and having like Jon Stewart was such a big fan of the Mets, and I just kind of inherited that when I was working with him. But I read that being a Mets fan means understanding and accepting complete devastation and depression, and knowing it's coming and bracing for it, being prepared for it, but also paradoxically having an absolutely insane nugget of magical thinking in you that says, oh, maybe they'll win this year.
Yeah.
And
that's mind-blowing. It's like, so every time you go to a Mets game, it's almost like you're going to church. You got a full sermon.
Yeah, that's so funny. Yeah, and I take that approach to so much of how I've approached my career. I've been accepting failure at every corner, but somehow still having delusions of miracles, I guess. but it's interesting because I had this problem with faith being that way, but I seem to be taking the model into other parts of my life.
Now, earlier, I referenced my conversation with Mike Sachs, who has a great podcast called Doing It with Mike Sachs. In my conversation with him, he was talking a lot about his love of The Twilight Zone. A little while after that conversation, I interviewed my friend Rob Schulte, who is the podcast producer for Mike Sachs, in addition to hosting a plethora of great podcasts of his own. And something eerily similar came up as an influence on him. It wasn't The Twilight Zone. It was Alfred Hitchcock Presents.
The thing that I latched onto, if I'm going to find one thing that I was no one else I knew was into at all, but it was compelling to me, was Alfred Hitchcock Presents. I loved Alfred Hitchcock Presents.
Wait, where were you? How were you watching Alfred Hitchcock Presents?
Nick at Night. Because
wow.
They would play I Love Lucy, and they would play,
I Dream of Jeannie.
I Dream of Jeannie. I mean, when Brady Bunch came on Nick at Night, that was a whole to-do. But I was already getting out of the Nick at Night phase by that time. When it got to a certain hour of the night, they showed Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and I loved it.
I had no idea they were doing that. You were really staying up late, Rob.
Yes, I was a late night kid, and it was 9:00. So but it was compelling to me, and I had never seen a Hitchcock movie. I had to ask who he was. I just thought he hosted this show for a long time, and you go back and watch it now, and they're still, to me, just as compelling as they were then. Except I actually know the complicities of or complexities, maybe both, of being an adult. So these scenarios that were compelling to me as a 9-year-old, maybe, you realize oh, this has real implications if this guy chops off the person's finger if the lighter doesn't light 10 times. It was, I loved it. That was the one thing I come back to that I was that is something that has stuck with me and was part of me for a very long time.
I'm assuming The Twilight Zone came out before Hitchcock Presents, or maybe Hitchcock Presents is a precursor. I'm not really certain.
I think Twilight Zone was before, but Hitchcock, I think, had a couple of different shows. He had The Mystery Hour, and then he had Presents, and it's Twilight Zone had the consistency. Where Hitchcock, had a few seasons of both of those shows. I think, if I'm remembering correctly, it doesn't really matter. One of them was longer than the other. So
Well, it's just interesting because Hitchcock Presents is very personality driven. Even though Rod Serling is the host of The Twilight Zone, The Twilight Zone, the vibe of that is the connecting tissue of all the stories. Whereas Hitchcock Presents, I guess in a way, that's sort of Guillermo del Toro has his Cabinet of Curiosities show on Netflix. Yeah. It's sort of like that. What was it specifically about Hitchcock? Was it the horror of it?
I think it was more of the thrillery horror, the complexity of not everything is good. And I've never actually thought about it until now. I just liked it. But I grew up in Missouri, and my family was that quasi-Catholic, right? We went to church for a few years, and then my parents got divorced. We stopped going to church, and I guess we were all kind of religious, but but I lived with my dad, and my dad was very much I think the easiest way to put it is do as I say, not as I do. Would listen to Dr. Laura, was morally superior type of guy, but was not at all, but wanted to put that out there.
Who's Dr. Laura?
Oh, Dr. Laura Schlesinger, very conservative talk show, morals, decaying the society, Look her up. She's great.
Yeah.
No.
I remember, I was hearing some like Focus on the Family type stuff when I was a kid.
Yeah. And like she came on like back to back with like Rush, and
Okay. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is like, my dad was an AM radio guy because I'm also think he was like afraid to like music. Anyway, point being.
Wait, what? What? Afraid to like music?
Yes.
So you think he was listening to talk radio because he was. Wait, okay. What is afraid to like music? Like, do you think
we'll get to Alfred in a second?
I'm just fast. I'm just leaping to the conclusion.
Oh, trust me, I have worked out a lot of this, and I've like, I will never know the answers. But like, my dad owned what he called a rhythm and blues bar in Westport in Missouri, but it was like a lot of just like 30-year-old white guys playing Mustang Sally. Like every week, like that's what it was. And so like I think he bought into that business because it was someone else's bar, and then he got hired as manager. Then he was asked, do you want to become part owner, that sort of thing. And so I think that was like, my job is making sure these bands are booked for this thing I bought into, right? So he has to focus on that type of who in his friend circles he can just make sure, because if we don't have live music, my bar doesn't work, right? And so I think that he would be too hyper focused on that side of work than to actually, like, if I venture out into other music, it's going to distract me from my job. And so he just turned on talk radio all the time.
Wow.
And so back to Alfred Hitchcock Presents, I think since he listened to a lot of conservative talk radio, I always got this view when I'd be picked up from school or whatever, that like, this is just the way people think, you got to be good and you do good things. And there's no, but it's like in this like seeping with like moral superiority and grossness to it. And when I would watch Alfred Hitchcock Presents, I saw almost like the other side, right? That like, no, not everyone is good. And even though I know these people on this like conservative radio station, and I didn't know what conservative was at the time, right? Like, I think I would then see like, oh, this feels more like reality, like this morality tale that I'm hearing when I'm picked up from school is like people faking what they hope the world to be, but not taking in accountability of what humans are capable of, and like understanding that like not everyone is all good or everyone is all bad. And like you see that in Alfred Hitchcock Presents, like that episode I hinted at earlier where the guy bets that his lighter will light 10 times or he'll get his finger chopped off. Like, I believe that was written by or directed by Roald Dahl. Like, wow. James and the Giant Peach, right? Yeah. Like these books for children that I was also reading. So when I would see that, I'd be like, wow, there's a whole world out there. I don't even know.
What's fascinating to me about this Alfred Hitchcock obsession of yours as a kid, which first of all, that show, I want to lump it in with all the similarities it has to the Twilight Zone. But when you think about the intro music, it's so quirky. It's not ambient chaos. It's sort of like,
and Alfred like had like, for all of his faults, like he's got like these like weird quirky like puns and jokes when he's like playing it straight. And there's generally always something like he's handcuffed to a chair during the intro and he's like, oh, they're coming after me now. And then by the end of the show, when he's closing it out, he like just takes the handcuff off by standing up and like moving the chair. Yeah. And so like there's this big joke that's like, oh, well, I got out of it anyway. I was never in really. Like he just plays a joke on the audience and is quirky while we watch this like intense thriller about someone like playing a prank that results in someone getting thrown off a train or something.
I think that it's possible that Alfred Hitchcock to you was a sort of bizarro Rush Limbaugh.
Oh,
you have two heavyset white guys. Only one is angrily presenting a view of the world, and then you have Alfred Hitchcock strolling on camera saying hello and and giving you a more nuanced, skewed view of the world, and then you fall asleep after watching this horrifying scenario.
And never having like bad dreams or anything, and like always eager to watch another episode.
And it's because of this like dance it has with the horror of it all. Like the
Yeah.
quirky music comes up again, and it's like,
Wow. I'm thinking too much about this now, but you are absolutely right, Tim.
I guess like what are how do you feel by the end of a Alfred Hitchcock Presents episode?
Then or now?
I guess in general. I'm asking in general because I haven't seen them in a while,
Yeah.
and I'm more familiar with the Twilight Zone, and I have the general sense of how you feel at the end of an episode of that show.
Yeah. Much like Twilight Zone, it varies slightly between the like, oh wow, okay, that was the twist or something, and then there's the other one's like, oh god, like that twist, like same episode I was talking about, the Roald Dahl episode, like the wife comes in and like stops the dude who wants to chop off the finger, and she's like, you're doing it again, you bet my Cadillac, this is the 6th Cadillac of mine you've lost, we're not doing it. And she's like, and I should know, or whatever, and pulls her hand out, and she's only got 2 fingers, like she's been betting with him their entire life. like hot damn. Or it's her brother or something, whatever. It's like it runs in the family.
I hope they're still playing it after the Friends reruns on Nick at Night now.
Oh, it would be great. What I will tell you is that specific episode I wanted to watch again because it is not on Peacock or whatever streaming service is hosting Alfred Hitchcock Presents now.
Why do you think that is? They still want to give Roald Dahl's estate the residuals.
It's got to be it. That has got to be it. With Wonka coming out, those residues skyrocket, I think.
Finally, I recently had the opportunity to speak with screenwriter and horror novelist Tananarive Due. Tananarive's published work includes The Keeper, The Wishing Pool, and The Reformatory. She also co-hosts one of my favorite podcasts called Life Writing. So it was wonderful to dive into the nuances of scary things and how they influence her work. And at the same time, we ended up talking about other scary things like race in America, for instance. What was the first genre that called out to you when you were a child?
I'm going to give this some honest thought because I really thought I was going to just jump out and say horror. Because that was what my mother was watching. She was watching those old creature feature movies. She gave me Stephen King when I was 16. This is my way of cheating and giving you 2 answers, actually. But now that I think about it, like really think about it, like the early fiction I was writing, the early Due era of age 8, 9, 10.
Yeah.
It was fantasy science fiction. It was
fantasy. Oh, yeah.
You stow away on a rocket. You have a talking cat. Literally, Chris Manning and his talking cat. I did a whole series about that kid, who was white, by the way. So that's a whole different story.
Well, let's talk about that a bit, because I recently have climbed my way out of the pit of writing basically white characters. Basically, that sort of mainstream vision of the world.
What humanity looks like, yeah.
And it is a strange experience to be like, oh, okay, like, do I have fear around like whether or not my Black voice is authentic? Is that what it is? Or is it simply fear that no one will read?
It's all of the above, baby. Like, what's so ironic about my last novel, The Reformatory, that takes place in the rural South? When I was a new young writer, like right out of college, I would have been petrified if I thought I was supposed to be writing rural novels out of the South. Because that was not my life. Okay? I was from Florida, but I was from Miami. If anything, that was Caribbean. That was not that was like air-conditioned suburbs. That was my childhood. Bust into the white school. Bust into the Black school with the white kids. That was me off the bus, Oreo. So questions of racial identity have always loomed big for me. I probably felt most comfortable and accepted around Black people because I went to a predominantly white college. Most of my friends there were white because it was so segregated. Like the Black students preferred to live in a certain dorm, and I wasn't in that dorm. Grad school, I was a foreign student at the University of Leeds, And all of a sudden, among the African students, like I had a line to dance with me. It was like the most surreal thing. And then when I started working, I found my real peer group, you know. And it's been and then through writing, I really found my peer group. And I taught at Spelman about 10 years ago now. And I often wish I had gone to an HBCU, because then I would have realized that, yeah, I have a peer group there, because we are the spectrum. We are the spectrum to completely segregated all Black schools, to never had any Black friends. I mean, and everything in between. And I would have found my group sooner. I had doubts about I loved Black people. I was raised by civil rights activists. Like, they were giving us comic books about civil rights heroes. But then when I went to school, I was Oreo and nobody would talk to me. So it was like very confusing. And my parents gave me some glimpses of hope. You know, through the NAACP, there was a program called ACSO, which was an academic and artistic Olympics, where every year you could just meet other kids from all over the country who were on their dream just like you. You know, musicians, scientists. So you could see them from a distance. But I was never in social situations where I was around a lot of other Black people who accepted me until I started working. And then to get back to your question, because this is all about you, Tim. All about you. I want you to get this. Here's what I would say about that. Obviously, working in television and film, especially if you're successful and you have longevity, you are often writing for white characters. This is a no-brainer. Yeah. And absolutely, I mean, very, very recently that started to shift, but now it's wholly shifting back, right? Like, okay, that's over. Yeah. So I get it's a hard habit to break. And sometimes when people are entering prose, they believe that by writing by widening
their characters.
By writing white characters, they will have a better chance to sell. I would say, nay. I would say, in fact, it's quite the opposite, because we are going to tell our most authentic stories that are rooted in our experiences. And I'll give you one example of that and how it's hard to come to it. And I hope this will be inspirational to you personally, Tim. When Jordan Peele was, I believe he was still working on Mad TV, and he was working on a few outlines for Get Out in his spare time. He worked on it for a while, okay? Maybe he got through 2 or 3 outlines. Did not yet know he was writing about race. Did not know. He thought his original inspiration, and I hate when we were able to Skype with him. This will tell you how long ago this was, because I just used the word Skype. But we were able to Skype with him before he won his Oscar for our online Black horror class you mentioned, which is sunkenplaceclass.com. Oh my God, it's still available. I just remembered that. But sunkenplaceclass.com. I don't know. But he started to talk about that. It wasn't about race. I was like, huh? And then Steve asked a question, and we never got back to it. But from the snippet he said, he was a couple outlines in, and it was still that third wheel. Like, it's like that feeling of not quite belonging, like you're hanging out with your girlfriend and you're her date, but you don't know that whole group of college friends standing on the outside looking at. He didn't know. He got deeper into it, more personal with it.
Yeah.
Boom, Get Out. Could he have solved that movie where it's just basically a white cast, probably, and someone who's on the outside looking in? He's a very talented writer. He probably could have sold that. But would it have been Get Out? Hell no, it wouldn't have been. Hell no, it wouldn't have been Get Out.
So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this best of You Are the Genre episode. We'll be back with a new roster of guests starting next week. Big thanks to Freddie Nunez, who created and sings the You Are the Genre theme song, and Adam Smith, who produced it. This is Tim Barnes signing off with your reminder that you are the genre.
First I got your voicemail, then I got you. We can meet in person or maybe on Zoom. So tell me what's your genre, tell me what do you do? I'd like to know the things that specifically